For prohibition of regulation, if a school makes exceptions to a dress code to accommodate non-religious students' needs, it ordinarily must also make comparable exceptions for the religious needs. Students may display religious message on items of clothing to the same extent and pursuant to the same conditions that they are prohibited to display non-religious messages. In addition to that, in some circumstances, federal or state laws may require schools to make accommodations that relieve substantial burdens on students' religious exercise. School officials may wish to consult with their attorneys regarding such obligations. School prayer. The most enduring and controversial issue related to school sponsoring religious activities is classroom prayer. In Engel versus Vitale in 1962, the Supreme Court held that the Establishment Clause prohibited the recitation of a school-sponsored prayer in public schools. Engel involved a simple and seemingly non-Caesarean prayer composed especially for the use in New York's public schools and banning the prayer exercise entirely. The court did not rest its opinion on the grounds that unwillingly students were coerced to pray. That would come much later. Rather, the court emphasized what it saw as the wrongs of having the government create and sponsor a religious activity. Graduation prayer. School officials may not mandate or organize prayer at a graduation or select speakers for such events in that manner. Favors religious speech such as prayer, where students or other private graduation speakers are selected on the basis of genuinely content-neutral, even-handed criteria, and schools do not determine or have control over their speech. However, that expression is not attributable to the schools and therefore may not be restricted because of its religious content or content opposing religion, and may include, in these circumstances, school officials may choose to make appropriate neutral disclaims to clarify such speech, whether it's religious or non-religious, its speakers and the school speeches. Moment of silence. If a school has a moment of silence or a quiet period during the school day, students are free to pray silently or not to pray. During these periods of time, teachers and other employees may not require or encourage or discourage them from praying during these such periods. Organized prayer. Students may organize prayer groups and religious clubs to the same extent that students are permitted to organize other non-curricular student activities. Such as groups must be given the same access to school facilities for assembling it as it's given in other non-curricular groups without discrimination. Because of the group's religious character or perspective, school officials should neither encourage nor discourage participation in students-run activities based upon the activity's religious characters or perspectives. Schools may take reasonable steps to ensure that the students are not pressured to participate or not participate in such religious activities. The Pledge of Allegiance. In 1954, Congress revised the Pledge of Allegiance to refer to the nation as under God, a phrase that has been recited by many generations of children. In 2000, Michael Newdow filed a suit challenging the phrase on behalf of his daughter, a public school student in California. Newdow argued that the Constitution permitted the recitation of the pledge with the phrase under God in public schools. Religious expressions in classwork and in homework. Students may express their beliefs about religion in homework, artwork, and in other written or oral assignments free to discrimination based on the religious perspectives of their submissions. Such homework and classwork should be judged by ordinary academic standards for substance, relevance, and other legitimate pedagogy objectives. Thus, if a teacher's assignments involve writing a poem, the work of a student who submits a poem in the form of a prayer, for example, a Psalms verse, should be judged based on academic standards such as literary qualities and be neither penalized nor rewarded on the account of the religious perspective. Religious activities. Over the past 20 years, evangelistic Christians and others have advanced the rights of religious organizations to have equal access to meeting spaces and other forms of recognition provided by public schools to students. These organizations have been consistently succeeding in securing the same privileges provided by public schools and to secular groups. Prayer and religious exercise during non-instructional time. Students may pray when not engaged in school activities or instructions, subject to the same rules designated to prevent materials disruption of the educational program that are applied to other privately initiated expressions activities. Students may also read from religious materials, say a prayer or blessing before meals, and engage in worship or study religious materials with fellow students during non-instructional time like recess or lunch, to the same extent that they may engage in non-religious activities. Although school authorities may impose rules or order a pedagogical restrictions on students' activities, they may not discriminate against student prayer or religious perspectives in applying such rules and restrictions. All right, excusals from school. Public schools have discretion to permit students to attend off-premises religious instructions if the schools do not encourage or discourage participation in such instructions or penalize students for attending to or not attending to these such things. Similarly, schools may excuse students from class to remove a burden on their religious exercise, including prayer or fasting, at least where doing so would not impose material burdens on other students. For example, it would be constitutional for schools to excuse students from class to enable them to fulfill their religious obligations regarding prayer, religious holidays, or other observations. States have attempted to balance this issue with varying prayer and public school laws, and several of these statuses have faced significant legal challenges. Mississippi law protects voluntary prayer at school-related events, while being careful to note the protection should not be instructed as the promotion of any religion or religious beef. Parents, school, and legislators continue to debate these kind of religious activities allowed in public schools. Mississippi prayer statuses was passed relatively recently in 2013. It is unclear whether there will be legal challenges to the law and what are the ramifications. The Supreme Court has been fairly clear that students are allowed to pray in public schools as long as the prayers are not school-sponsored and the prayers do not interfere with other students' schoolwork. School assemblies. Student speakers at school assemblies and non-curricular activities such as sporting events may not be selected on the basis that either favors or disfavors religious perspectives. Where a student speaker is selected based on genuinely content-neutral, even-handed criteria, and the school does not determine or have control over the content of the student's speech, the expression is not reasonably attributed to the school and therefore may not be restricted because it's religious content or a content opposing religion and may include prayer. In these circumstances, school officials may choose to make appropriate neutral disclaimers to clarify that such speech, whether religious or non-religious, is the speaker's and not the school's speech. By contrast, where school officials determine or have control over the content of what is expressed, such as speech is attributable to school and may not include prayer or content promoting or opposing religion. Baccalaureate ceremonies. School officials may not mandate or organize religion baccalaureate ceremonies. However, if a school makes its facilities and related services available to other private groups, it must make its facilities and services available on the same terms to organizers to privately sponsor religious baccalaureate ceremonies. In addition, a school may disclaim official sponsorships or approval of events held by private groups, provided it does so in a manner that neither favors or disfavors groups that meet to engage in a prayer or religious speech. In the 19th century, Protestants and Catholics frequently fought over Bible reading and prayer in public schools. They fought over which Bible and which prayer were appropriate in the classroom. Some Catholics were troubled that the school reading materials included King James Version of the Bible, which favored the Protestants. The Supreme Court stepped into the controversies, which it ruled in Cantwell versus Connecticut in 1940 and Everson versus Board of Education, Ewing Townships in 1947. that the First Amendment Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause apply to the states. The two clauses say Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Before those two courts' decision, the courts had applied the religion clauses only to the actions of the federal government. All right, the rights of parents. Parents sometimes complain that the secular practices at school inhibited their right to direct their religious upbringing. These complaints typically rest on both of the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Due Process Clause, which forbids the state to deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Supreme Court has interpreted them as protecting the rights of the parents and shape and control the education of their children. When they object to certain school practices, the parents often seek permission for the children to skip the offending lesson or to opt out of the class rather than try to end the practice school-wide. Religious literature. Public school students have a right to distribute religious literature to their schoolmates on the same terms as they are permitted to distribute other literature that is unrelated to school curriculum and other activities. School may impose the same reasonable time, place, or manner restrictions on distributing of religious literature as they do on non-school literature generally, but they may not target religious literature for more permissive or restrictive regulations. Religion. There are over 4,000 religions, faith groups, and denominations all over the world. 83% of the world's faithful account of the global population falling under 12 classical regions by Buddhism, Christianity, Confucianism, Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Judaism, Shintoism, Sikhism, Taoism, and Zoroastrianism. Christianity leading in the largest religion, having about 2.4 billion followers, founded in Judea. Islam is being the second, having 1.9 billion followers, founded in Arabia. In Hinduism, falling behind them, having 1.2 billion followers, hailing from the Indian subcontinent. There are about 1.193 billion people, which is about 15.58% of people who are agnostic/atheism. This is just about Hinduism. But believe it or not, Christianity is expecting to lose a net of 66 million adherently, most to religious unaffiliated categories between 2010 from 2050. Christianity has declined in the U.S. from the collapse of marriages and the result of resident fatherhood declining. And when you think about Christianity and you think about like the people that's around your peers, who do you think is a Christian? Or what religion do you always see around, whether it was in high school or in college? Me, I was baptized in 2007. I was born in 2002, so I was about 5. It was in October. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I consider myself as a Christian, but I consider myself as a lukewarm Christian. I'm kind of finding my way back into the church, but it's kind of hard. But that's just my experience with Christianity. I grew up in a Christian household. My grandparents are both pastors and ministers, so it was kind of inevitable for me to find out about it. I've led prayer in schools, in school functions. I've even did prayers and very active in the church. So whenever you think about religion and how many people come from certain religions, most common religions like Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, you see that a lot, and you just wonder, are people like lukewarm Christians or lukewarm Hinduism? Can you practice it? It's just something to think about. In 1633, Abington versus the school districts versus Skimp focused primarily on schools sponsored Bible reading. The Supreme Court established that is how current prohibition on state sponsors of the state sponsors prayers in the U.S. schools. Although the Constitution forbids public school official capacities from directing or favoring prayer, students and teachers do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. The Supreme Court has made clear that private religious speech far from being a First Amendment orphan, is as fully protected under the free speech clause as secular private expression. All right, and that is the end of my slideshow. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation, and I hope I gave you guys a lot of thoughts, and I hope I can just bring awareness to Mississippi prayers in school. Thank you.